we're live, and for everyone watching this across LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and those who are watching the recording, thank you so much, and a very, very big warm welcome for all of you. I'm here with Daniel Pink, who has authored 7 books, of which 5 of them have become New York Times bestsellers. And not just that, Dan has also co-hosted or hosted a show on Nat Geo called Crowd Control, and he is the speechwriter for Al Gore back in 1995 to 1997. So I mean, Dan's history is. I've been looking at his Wikipedia page and just all of his history for the past few weeks, trying to come up with a good intro. But really, what I wanted to say is, I met Dan at a conference 2 months ago. This was the CEX Creators Economy back in May. I almost didn't reach out to him to say hi, but in just a split second, I thought, I need to take use of this moment. So I reached out, and Dan, you made me feel very comfortable. I don't know if you remember the time we met. I was kind of like running up to you and saying hi. And we spoke for maybe 10, 15 minutes, but I remember walking away feeling like, what was I so scared about? He was so kind and friendly. Dan, thanks so much for being here and welcome. And is there something that I missed about your intro that you want to share with people before we start?
No, it was perfectly comprehensive. Yeah, and you left out all the horrible misdeeds I've had in my life, so I appreciate that.
You're very welcome. So I'd like to jump into your book, The Power of Regret. I got this copy at the Creators Conference, and at this point, I've probably read the book twice or thrice just to prepare for this interview as well. And I have to say that until I read the book, I, like many readers, I assume, I had a different perception of this emotion of regret. I certainly have regrets and I've thought about them, but I never let myself dwell on them too much. But you have a different hypothesis in the book. In fact, you encourage people to dwell on their regrets because you think it will help them to the extent that it's actually useful. So can you begin by sharing why you think it's even worth thinking about our regrets?
Well, I think it's really important the verb we choose here to deal with our regrets. So, and I think there's some nuance here. So we have this one philosophy that we should ignore our regrets. Okay, so that's the verb. Ignore your regrets. Always be positive. Never be negative. Always look forward. Never look backward. That's a bad idea. That is not a recipe for living. We have 50 years of science that tells us that. However, I don't know if I'd encourage people to dwell on their regrets, because I think if you spend too much time thinking about your regrets, if you ruminate on your regrets, if you wallow in your regrets, that's bad too. What I want people to do is confront their regrets, use them as information, use them as signals, because when we do that, we have a pile of evidence showing that this emotion can be transformative. It can help us on a whole many aspects of our life if we treat it right. The problem is that no one ever teaches us how to treat it right. So we either ignore them or we wallow in them, but what we should be doing is in the middle and confronting them and using them as engines, using them to fuel an engine for progress.
And you go on to talk about how to do that. I think towards the second half of the book. The first half, you first talk about why it's even worth thinking about regrets. And there you give an intro to regrets as there's 4 types of regrets: foundation regrets, boldness regrets, moral regrets, and connection regrets. For those who haven't read your book, can you just briefly describe what these different buckets mean?
Let me tell you how I got there, because I think that's going to be useful for your viewers too. Let me even take 3 steps backward. Okay, so what I'm doing here is trying to get us to think differently about this emotion of regret. And the question is then, how do I have the substance, the evidence, the knowledge to encourage people to do that? And there are 3 big legs on which this research stands. One of them is I looked at about 50 or 60 years of research, existing academic research on this emotion of regret. That was research in cognitive science, research in developmental psychology, research in neuroscience, research in social psychology. Scholars have been studying this emotion for over 50 years. So that's one way. The second thing is that I also did a very large public opinion survey, only of the U.S. population, but of the U.S. population, a very large public opinion survey of the U.S. population. It was the largest survey of American attitudes about regret ever conducted. Then what I also did was I gathered regrets from all over the world in what I called the World Regret Survey. And to date, we have collected, I didn't check this morning, but we've collected well over 21,000 regrets from people in 109 countries now. So crazy. All right, now, with that as the prelude, let me answer your question more directly. What I found in looking at that third basket, these 21,000 regrets around the world, is that over and over again, exactly as you say, people around the world seem to have these same 4 core regrets. And these regrets had less to do with like the area or the domain of people's lives than something going on beneath the surface. So you mentioned foundation regrets. Foundation regrets are, if only I'd done the work. These are regrets that people have about typically relatively small decisions early in life, but regular bad small decisions early in life that snowball into something bad later in life. So I spent too much, saved too little. I didn't eat well or exercise, so now I'm in bad health. I didn't work hard enough in school or university, so now I don't have the skills to compete in a very intensely competitive job market. Okay, so that's foundation regrets. Second one, boldness regrets. These are people who regret not traveling, people who regret not speaking up, people who regret not asking somebody out on a date, people who regret not starting a business. So if only I'd taken the chance. Third category, moral regrets. Again, these regrets happen when our life is or our decisions are at a juncture. And in moral regrets, you can do the right thing, you can do the wrong thing. And my analysis is that most of us, not every single person, but almost all of us want to do the right thing. And then when we do the wrong thing, we feel bad about it. And so moral regrets are, if only I'd done the right thing. I have a lot of regrets about infidelity in relationships, a lot of regrets about bullying. And then finally, connection regrets. If only I'd reached out. These are about the whole gamut of relationships in our lives. And when those relationships, drift apart or were never fully intact, people want to do something. They want to make a move to connect, but they resist because they think it's not going to be reciprocated. They think it's going to feel really awkward, and they end up regretting it. So those are the 4 regrets. Again, moral regrets, if only I'd done the right thing. Foundation regrets, if only I'd done the work. Boldness regrets, if only I'd taken the chance. And connection regrets, if only I'd reached out.
Thanks so much for giving that background, because I was going to ask you, how many responses did you finally analyze? Because in the book you mentioned something around 14,000. And now it seems like 21,000.
They keep coming in.
Right.
Day, they keep coming in from all over the world. And the viewers out there can go on the site worldregretsurvey.com and add their regret if they want. But we also have an interactive map, so you can click on a country, or in the US or Canada, a state or a province that allows you to see the last, I think it's like 8 regrets from that jurisdiction.
What did you do with all this data? Because when you were working on the book, I'm sure you had about 5,000 that came in the first few months, or just a few thousand. So that's a lot of data. And I know you worked with some company that helped you analyze all this information, but did you go through each and every one of these entries that came in?
In the World Regret Survey, the written regrets, I actually read through the first 15,000 of them.
Okay.
But remember, just to be clear, these regrets, people are writing a paragraph. They're not writing a 10-page essay, So they're relatively short entries. And, in some cases, people are writing simply a sentence. So right. It's a lot, but it's manageable. I think what becomes interesting about that way of doing the research is the volume teaches you things. And so when you see people from somebody from Malaysia, when you see like a 28-year-old person from Malaysia and a 59-year-old person from Wisconsin and a 41-year-old from Bogota, Colombia, all using very similar language, that tells you something. And the way that you get at that is with this incredible volume.
And of these four categories of regrets, one thing that maybe you mentioned somewhere in the book that I didn't see is which was the most prominent one? Is it the foundation regrets? It's the majority of, or is it equally
Well,
split?
no, none of them really constitute the majority.
Okay.
But the biggest category of all among the four is connection regrets, and
Oh,
boldness regrets are the second one. And I think that tells us two things. If we first of all, if you look at like connection regrets and boldness regrets, those are typically regrets of inaction. Those are typically regrets about things you didn't do. And we have some pretty overwhelming evidence, both in some of the research I've done, but also in the existing academic research, that especially as we get older, inaction regrets are far more common than action regrets. As we age, it's a ratio of maybe 2-to-1, 3-to-1, sometimes 4-to-1. The older we get of having regrets of inaction over regrets of action. So I think that tells us something. The other thing to take, again, one step back is that, these regrets reveal something here, and I think what they reveal is what we want out of life. Because when people tell you what they regret the most, they're also telling you what they value the most. And I think that's a really important insight here. And with connection regrets, what people are saying they're valuing is love, essentially. And not only romantic love, but companionate love, the love we have for people who we're related to, people we have who are as our friends, people we have as colleagues. And yeah, I don't think it's a huge surprise, because it's consistent with other research out there, including the famous Harvard grant study, that basically what gives our life meaning and purpose and wholeness is, having other people whom we can share life with, having other people who care about us and whom we care about.
I was actually going to quote that study soon as well. And I also just wanted to tell the people watching this that if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, just put that in the comment box and it'll slowly start coming in as I can see it on the side here. But on the connection regrets especially, the Harvard study I think was published 6 years ago. The 180-year study was published. And I've gone through the TEDx talks and papers, and I feel at this point, millions of others have also done that. And we all have people that we wish we'd connected with more. We wish we'd kept in touch. I know I have at least a dozen people.
Yeah.
But knowing does not lead to action. Just knowing that this is what the longest study on happiness tells us, even that sometimes is not enough to take action actively on a day-to-day basis. So do you have anything to say there? How do you get people to go from knowledge to action?
That's a huge problem in all of the human experience. I mean,
Right.
the knowing doing gap is often massive inside of organizations, in people's professional lives, in their lives as human beings. And so Bob Sutton and Jeff Pfeffer wrote a book about the knowing doing gap about 20 years ago that's worth looking at for some specific ways of guidance. I think that there are a few kind of interesting decision-making tools that we can use here. So let me offer two. One of them, when it comes to connection regrets. Okay, so here let's dissect. Let's go into these connection regrets. What's going on there? Typically, what happens is this: you have a relationship, and it's no longer intact, or maybe it was never fully formed, and it starts to come apart. And it comes apart in these, in most cases, pretty undramatic ways. The people who you said you have a dozen people who you lost touch with or something like that. Did you have like knockdown, drag out fights with any of them?
No, not with most of them. It was just drifting apart.
Exactly. That's the story. That's the story I heard over and over again. So it drifts apart, and here's what happens. Somebody wants to reach out, and they say, "Oh man, I haven't talked to her for 8 years, and so it's going to be really awkward to reach out, and they're not going to care anyway." So they don't do anything, and then 2 years later they say, "Oh, I really should reach out to her, but oh man, it's going to be even more awkward because it's now been 10 years and they're not going to care." And there are two big problems with that. There are two big analytic problems with that. The first is that people's anticipation of awkwardness and their experience of awkwardness, there's a big gap there. Not quite the knowing doing gap, but the fearing and reality gap of awkwardness is massive. When people do reach out, it's way less awkward than they think. It's usually not awkward at all. So that's one thing. The second thing is that I fear that, I'm going to reach out to you after 8 years. You're not going to care. You know what? People care. And 95 times out of 100, people welcome the overture. So we're wrong about that. So here's what you can do. If you are at a juncture and you're saying, should I reach out or should I not reach out? Being at that juncture has answered your question. If you are wondering whether you should reach out to somebody, in the moment that you're wondering that, reach out. That's, I think, the easiest thing to do. The second thing is that if you're still stuck, another heuristic to use is to actually make a phone call to yourself 10 years from now. What does the you of 10 years from now want you to do? The you of 2032. The you of 2032 is going to tell you to reach out. Because you know that if you meet that you of 2032 and you still haven't reached out to somebody, that you of 2032, when you meet her, is going to be a little bit hacked off.
Is this how you apply this to your own life? Has there been people that you've reached out to since you began working on this book? Because, you spent almost a year just thinking about regrets.
I spent even longer than that thinking about regret. I spent about 2.5 years working on this. And,
wow. Okay.
But let me answer that. Let me answer that question, because it's a very astute question. And the answer very clearly is yes, it has affected my own life, because I was one of those people who fell into the trap. I was one of those people who said, I haven't talked to so-and-so for a while. I should probably, no, it's going to be really awkward. I don't want to feel awkward. And so I didn't do it. And besides, they're not going to care. All right. I was the perfect example of someone making those foolish assumptions. That's what I did. And now I've totally changed my behavior. And I've tried to apply this as much as possible. So again, if I'm at this moment where I'm saying, should I reach out or should I not reach out? The question answers itself. If you're at the moment where you're asking the question, you know the answer. So stop asking the question and send an email, send a text, make a phone call.
Well, anyone who's watching and listening to this, if there's someone that you think of right now that you want to reach out to, I think the moment to do it is right now. And exactly. I was just thinking about someone from my own life that I should just reach out to after this live stream is over. There's one more question I had on the foundation regrets, because it almost feels like there's this dichotomy between foundation regrets versus boldness regrets. Because on the one side, you have people who are, almost they're prioritizing immediate gratification for a longer term return. So eating that one extra cake today because it feels more gratifying than not eating healthy. On the other hand, I also feel like always planning for the future and not letting yourself maybe be present or enjoy the present moment might lead to some boldness regrets later on. So there is a balance, of course. And that's, I'm curious if you've thought about that and how you think about it for your own life.
Well, yeah, I mean, I actually think that there's a compatibility between the foundation and the boldness, and I'll tell you why. There's not an inherent tension or any kind of antagonism between the two. So the people who have foundation regrets, they didn't say, I didn't save enough money because I started a business and it went south on me and now I'm bankrupt. They didn't say that. They said, I haven't saved enough money because I spent too much money on clothes and cars and restaurants and no time saving, right? So usually the cause of the foundation regret is not excessive boldness. It is insufficient conscientiousness. So and I think what happens is that when people and the need that foundation regrets reveals is our need for some amount of stability. And I think once we have some stability, a little bit of even a modest amount of stability, we're going to be better equipped to take those kinds of boldness regrets. So excessive boldness was almost never the cause of these foundation regrets. But having a foundation gave people a little bit more of the moxie to actually act boldly.
Right. So they're not. You're right. They're not a dichotomy, as I said. But I just felt like there was some balance between also planning for the future versus acting on it
I
right
agree.
now.
I agree.
And
I agree. I
exactly.
agree. What the you know what you know there were a few people out there who would say, in the database, who would say something like, "Oh, I worked too hard. I never had any fun. I didn't spend my money on anything valuable or satisfying." But there were not that many people there. Like most people, most people, are not. You don't have a lot of people who are regretting being sort of too prudent with their money, for instance. You have people who regret a little bit being too prudent with their lives. And to think about it's an interesting question that you're onto here, because the boldness regrets are less about the outcome than about the action itself. And I found people a little bit less outcomeist than I expected. So I have a lot of people who regret not asking somebody out on a date. So X years ago, I could have asked out John. I was really attracted to John and I wanted to ask him out on a date, but I chickened out and never did it. When they say that, they're not saying, and if I had done that, John and I would be happily married and living in a lovely house with 3 kids and a Labrador Retriever. It's really a question of, like, I had a moment in their life when they could have stepped up and done something and they didn't. And I think the realization is that we have to take those moments in our lives. We have to take those moments in our lives more than we might think. I think that in a way, and I think one of the things that's happening with the effect, one of the explanations, at least perhaps, of what's happening with that age effect with inaction, so that people are more likely to have regrets of inaction as they get older, is a sense of our mortality. That is, we recognize at various moments in our life, if not in the kind of subconscious backbeat of our lives, that we are all mortal, that we are all going to die. And at a certain point, that is a forcing function. It should say, well, wait a second, if I'm only going to be here for a short amount of time, when am I going to do something? When am I going to take that trip? When am I going to speak up for something I care about? When am I going to ask that person out on a date? And I think that is really a lot of the fuel for the boldness regrets. What makes but it becomes easier to be bold, as sort of you were implying, when people have something of a stable foundation.
Yeah, and I feel that almost what you've done is shorten the timeline between, because I think at some point we all recognize that I wish I'd taken more risks, maybe after we're 50 years old, 60 years old. But with this book, you're trying to almost shorten the timeline by making people take more risks. At the same time, also connect with people more, be more moral, and work hard now than wait for everything later on. And
I think so. But the reason I say that is like that. I mean, I think it's interesting that's an interesting interpretation of the book, as if I'm sort of trying to counsel people to do that. And in a way, we have a sort of a hall of mirrors here, because what I'm doing is that I'm simply reflecting back what people told me. All right. So around the world, people are saying these are the 4 things that I regret. And if we use as I said before, if we know what people regret, we know what they value. So these 4 things offer a reverse image of what people want out of life. So these 21,000 people who are telling me their regrets are also telling me what they value. They're telling me what they want most out of life. Foundation regrets tell us that we value some amount of stability. Boldness regrets tell us that we value learning and growth and just doing stuff. Moral regrets tell us we value goodness, and connection regrets tell us we value love. So in a way, I'm simply reflecting back what people are telling me are the constituent elements of the good life.
And by doing that, I feel that you're being this conduit for channeling this information and hopefully getting people to minimize some of these regrets that they have in their own lives. And
but I mean, that you got it. That's the idea. That's the idea. And that is, I think if we look back, all of us have regrets. Regret is one of the most common emotions that human beings have. Everybody has regrets. Not having regrets is often a sign of an underdeveloped brain or some kind of brain disorder. But then as we look forward, I think we want to try to minimize some of our regrets. I don't think we can minimize all of our regrets. I think that's a fool's game. But I think we want to minimize the right regrets. And these 21,000 people are telling me what the right regrets are to minimize.
And on some level, I don't even think, do you even think, have you met someone who told you that I have absolutely no regrets in my life?
Well, it's funny you say that, because I have people who say, So I have people in the database who they go to the World Regret Survey and they submit, I don't have any regrets. And then they say, but 30 years ago, I bullied a kid and I still feel really bad about it, but I don't have any regret. Okay. So you have a lot of that. People don't like to, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. People don't like to confront their regrets. They don't, the word is so mortifying to people. The word itself is so aversive that they run screaming away from it. When I did, again, going back to the research, I did a public opinion survey, 4,489 Americans, brilliantly gorgeous sample of the population so that it reflected America in all of its glorious diversity. I asked people the question, how often do you look back? Here's the exact words of the question. How often do you look back on your life and wish you had done things differently? How often do you look back on your life and wish you had done things differently? Right? So what am I doing there? I'm describing regret, but I'm not using the word regret because that word is so aversive to people. And what we found is that 83% of Americans say that they do this at least occasionally. There was 1% of people who said they never do this. I never look back and wish I had done things differently. 1% said that. And only 12% said they did it rarely. Everybody else said they do it at least occasionally. And some of them, do it, and because what we know, again, we have science on this. Social psychology tells us that regret is one of the most ubiquitous human emotions. It's one of the most common emotions that human beings express. It might be the most common negative emotion that human beings express. We know that from this rich body of science. We know from developmental psychology that the very ability to understand regret, to experience regret, is part of our cognitive development. This is why 5-year-olds don't have regrets. 5-year-olds don't have regrets because their brains haven't developed enough. Regret is a very sophisticated cognitive and emotional process. It involves time travel. It involves negating real events and substituting things that never happened, and then returning to the present day, to a world that is suddenly reconfigured by what you've done in the imagined past. I mean, it's great. It requires some sophistication. So little kids don't do that. Neuroscientists and neurosurgeons and neurologists teach us that people with certain kinds of brain lesions can't experience a regret. Certain kinds forms of Huntington's disease can't experience a regret. That regret is a psychiatrists tell us that sociopaths don't experience a regret. So when people say they have no regrets, they're either 5 years old or they have brain damage or are sociopaths. And we see that reflected in the survey with 1% saying they never do this thing. Now, if I had said, how often do you experience regret? I think I'd get a different answer to that question. I think you'd have a lot of people saying exactly what you just said. I don't have any regrets, but if you describe it without using the R word, you get a much more accurate account of people's experience. And that is very consistent with what we've been learning about this misunderstood emotion for 50 years.
And there's obviously a cultural media has something to do with this, because before your book came out, or academic research, not everyone goes and reads these papers to understand how regrets work. So right, you've done the hard work of almost making this a mass product that more people can consume. But I think there's a lot of opposing force that tells you not to have regrets, or that tells you live a no regret life, which I think that's why it's hard for people to accept that, yes, I regret this, because that shows, or they might think that shows failure on their part to have not done something right.
I think you're exactly right. This is the case that I'm making here is case that it's not, it's like I'm on a bicycle and I'm riding into the wind. All right. I'm not, I'm riding into the wind, and I'm doing that consciously. I'm doing that intentionally, because I feel like that wind is again, wind is, maybe not the best example, but I'm going against the countervailing opinion, because the countervailing opinion is empirically wrong and is a dangerous prescription for life. it is the, it is the this philosophy of no regrets, that you should always look forward, never look backward, that you should always be positive and never look and never be negative. That is, to me, in some ways, the quintessential example of bullshit. All right, when we think about what is bullshit, bullshit is something that is demonstrably untrue, and if you believe it, it's dangerous. And so that's what this is. This philosophy that of being positive all the time, always looking forward and never looking back, is complete nonsense. It's not what the science tells us, and it's not a recipe for living. Now, to be fair, going back to what we said earlier, the answer is not to dwell on our regrets, ruminate on our regrets, wallow on our regrets. No way. That's a really bad idea. What we want to do is we want to think about our regrets, use them as information, use them as signals, and enlist them in a systematic way. And when we do that, once again, we have science on this. We have social psychology that tells us if we lean into our regrets, we can become better negotiators. It can help us become better negotiators. If we lean into our regrets, it can help us become better problem solvers. If we lean into our regrets, it can help us become better strategists, avoid cognitive biases, think more clearly, and even find greater meaning in life. So you got it exactly right. And then I'm going against a very powerful countervailing view out there, but that countervailing view is misguided.
Empirically wrong, as you said. You offer some actionable ways that people can confront their regrets, because I think without having some guidance, it can also be easy to just dwell on them. Because for
Absolutely.
someone who was a bully in their high school, just the act of reliving that life again, and just recognizing that I was this extremely mean bully is such a hard thing to do. So how do you give some actionable ways that they can do this?
It's a great point, and we haven't been taught how to do this. This is one of the big problems. It's one of the big problems. So, to me, I think there's sort of a 3-step process, and we can think of it as inward, outward, forward. So inward, outward, forward. So inward would be, you begin with, how do you think about the regret in yourself? So let's use your bully example, okay? So let's say that you have somebody who is, I don't know, pick an age, 41 years old, who was a bully in high school, and now he feels regrets about that. All right, he's probably felt regret about that for 25 years, say. All right, so how does that person deal with that? First of all, you need to, when we talk to ourselves internally, the way we talk to ourselves is outrageous and cruel and brutal and vicious. We talk to ourselves in ways that are so ridiculously cruel, we would never talk to anybody else that way. So that person is probably saying, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe that. He's probably swearing at himself, saying, I'm just a horrible, wretched, terrible human being. All right. What you need to do, there's a whole line of research I write about this on what's called self-compassion. You should treat yourself with kindness rather than contempt. Don't treat yourself better than anybody else, but don't treat yourself worse than anybody else. If I had a 41-year-old, if any of us had a 41-year-old friend who said, oh my God, I feel so bad, I was a bully when I was 16 years old, would you say, you idiot, what's wrong with you? You're the worst person. You wouldn't have to say that to anybody else. Don't say it to yourself. All right. So recognize that your mistakes are part of the human condition, that regrets are part of the human condition. You think you're singular by being a bully? I can pull up 150 examples in 13 seconds of people who have this exact same regret. And then finally recognize that is a moment in your life, not the full measure of your life. You take the full measure. Does what you did at one point at age 16 fully define who you are? No. So that's the inward. Outward, there's a lot to be said for disclosure. Disclosure is a form of unburdening. That's why I have so many people telling a complete stranger about their regret. When we unburden, we unburden ourselves. We lift the pain a little bit. The other thing that I think is undersold here is that emotions, almost by their nature, are abstract. They're abstractions. They're blobby. They're vaporous, right? That's what makes positive emotions feel so good. but it's what makes negative emotions feel so bad. And so when you take a negative emotion like regret and write about it or talk about it, you transmute it from that abstraction into something concrete. That makes it less menacing, and it also helps you begin the sense-making process. So we go inward, treat ourselves with kindness rather than contempt. We go outward, we talk about it, we write about it to convert it from abstract to concrete. And then that's not enough. The final thing is we have to draw a lesson from it. We have to say, what did I learn from this, and what am I going to do about it? And so for your bully, let's stick with him for a second. That bully needs to say, okay, what's the lesson that I learned from this? Or even better, if someone else were in this situation, what's the lesson that she would learn from it? And I think what it tells us, this particular regret, is that, wow, 41-year-old, you value kindness and you value being kind. So that's the lesson, and you feel bad when you're not kind. So this says that you should be kinder in your interactions in the future, that you should avoid even the mild temptation to bully, and that when you see other people being bullied, you should stand up and do something. And that's how, and so you can take this. So what this is doing for this bully here is that it's clarifying what he values. Hey, you value kindness more than you might realize. This is why this thing has bothered you for 25 years. And it's instructing you on how to live better.
And hopefully also reach out to the people that you bullied and maybe reconnect with them, apologize.
Well,
as well.
It's interesting you say that, because I didn't write about this, and now I wish I would have, because I heard from people who bullied other people who then went back and apologized to them. And what I found, the most common experience was this. People would go back to, and I also heard just anecdotally and other things from people who were bullied and then had their bully reach out to them to apologize. What I found is that in general, not in every case, the person who was bullied was far less troubled than the person who was doing the bullying.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Do you have a reason why? Because the person who was bullied just buried that memory?
I think it could be that that I don't know. Okay, so I'd love to hear your opinion on this. So, but I'll give you a guess. I think the guess is that in the case of the person who was bullied, they know what happened next. They were bullied. Their life didn't fall apart. They moved on. Whereas the person who was the bully doesn't know what happened next and is living with the possibility that they did some serious harm. But that's just a guess. What do you think?
Right. So I would like to think I was not a bully in school or college. And, I also was not bullied in any traumatic way. So it's hard to be empathetic at all in this situation. So I would only say that the person who was bullied in a traumatizing way has used that for their strength later on in life, and almost think of that as their foundation blocks for what made them strong right now. So they don't really view themselves as a victim. But once again, I have no idea. Just guessing at this.
That's a good. I like that. I think that's a good explanation. I think that's a good explanation.
But I think what you were trying to say earlier was to self-compassion, externalizing what you're thinking, not keeping it inside your head, and that abstracts the whole process of regret, and sharing it with someone, and also taking some valuable lesson from this for moving forward.
Yeah, being explicit about drawing a lesson from it. And we can think of it as self-compassion, that's inward, self-disclosure, that's outward, and then self-distancing, which is taking a step back and saying, what did I learn from this and what can I do about it in the future?
And because we're talking about this topic, I just want to end this part of the interview with just asking you, what is one of your biggest regrets that you feel comfortable sharing with everyone?
I have a lot of regrets. I mean, one of my big regrets, I mean, just to keep on this theme here, is that I have regrets about kindness. And it's unusual, not unusual, because it's actually not that unusual. So like you, I was never a bully, but I was also in situations in my life when I was much younger, and not even that much younger, but when I was, in school and in university and as a young professional, where I was in situations where people were not being treated well. They were being excluded. They were being left out. They were not being treated fairly. I saw it. I knew that it was wrong, and I didn't say anything. So it was sort of like a moral regret through inaction. And it's bugged me and bugged me and bugged me for a long time. But again, like our 41-year-old bully, what it teaches me is that, it actually helped me understand that I value kindness more than and fairness and justice and good treatment of people more than I might have originally known. And it also tells me what to do in the future. It tells me, and I try at least to be, in my own way, more inclusive, more, if I see people being excluded in some way, trying, if I can, to bring them in a little bit. And so it's been a clarification for me, but it's also been instructive for me about how to live the rest of my life.
Thank you for sharing that. I also remember reading that in your book. You mentioned kindness as one of the biggest regrets, or something that you just value much more now than you did when you were younger.
I do, and I came to that through. Regret taught me that. So what I could do here, let's just take another beat on this, okay? So what I could do is I could say, let's say that I felt bad that I didn't that people were being left out, people were being excluded, and I knew it was wrong and didn't do anything. I could say no regrets. That's in the past. That's in the past. That doesn't matter at all. No regrets. That's a bad idea. I'm not going to be any better in my life. Or I could also say, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. I'm just a horrible human being. I'm the worst person in the world. I don't deserve anything. I should just pack it in because I'm morally unworthy to continue interacting with other people. That's a bad idea too. What I should be doing is, wait a second, something's bugged me for 20 years or 30 years. Beep, 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 beep. That's a pretty strong signal. That's telling me something. I need to listen to that. I don't want to go, bah, 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 no regrets. I want to go like this and listen to it. This is trying to tell me something, and listen to it and learn from it and do better in the future.
I really hope people watching this, including myself, take this seriously, because my hypothesis here is one reason why we don't act on our regrets is because of the volume of distraction that we have in today's lives, that maybe for a minute I'm thinking about the fact that I bullied someone in school, but the next moment I get a message from my friend, or I get a ping on my phone, or I get an email. There's so many things that distract us from what's important sometimes, that it's easy to lose track of that amongst the sea. So I think I just wanted to mention to people watching that maybe you're spending all this time watching this video. It's worth spending a few minutes thinking about your regrets and also making some amends for it. In the last few minutes, I want to switch to your writing and creative process, because it's very rare to get to talk to someone who's a 5-time New York Times bestselling author and someone who just has spent the past few decades writing. So it seems like all of your books stem from a very, very exhaustive research process. I haven't read Free Agent Nation, but I was reading the first few chapters, or the first few pages, and it seemed like you personally polled for an entire year to find out how many free agents were there in the US. And is that true?
Well, on that particular book, which came out 21 years ago, I actually traveled around the country interviewing several hundred free agents, several hundred people who had decided to go work for themselves, as freelancers or as independent contractors or as small entrepreneurs. And so I traveled around the country. I don't remember how many states I visited, but traveled all over America and had these very, very long, multiple hour interviews with hundreds of people to get their experience about what it was really like out there.
That's amazing. And you mentioned your wife was also helping you throughout this entire process back then, or your partner.
My wife on Free Agent Nation, my wife and at the time we had one kid, they came with me for several of the trips. I didn't do it all sort of like, I'm leaving on February 1 and I'm not going to return until January 31. It was more like I would go out for a few weeks and come back to Washington, go out for a few weeks, come back to Washington, go out for a few weeks and come back for Washington.
Okay, got it. But yeah, I mean, it seems like, all of your books definitely stem from reading decades of academic research. And then you've combined that with, in that case, personal research, interviewing people, and with the regret survey, which is the largest survey on regret conducted ever. Once again, you did hundreds of interviews. Where does this penchant for research come from for you? Because this is not easy work by any means.
It's an interesting question. I think it comes from just wanting to understand stuff and also wanting to get it right. Like just wanting to know what's true and what's not.
Hmm.
And I think that part of it is that, you know, if you're going to, and also I think part of it is just a responsibility to readers. I mean, if that
Hmm.
makes any sense. If I'm going to go out there, if I'm going to go out and say, hello, I want you to spend $25 on this thing that I created. I want you to spend 8 or 9 hours reading it, and I want you to believe what I have to say, and change your life as a consequence of it. I want to be right. I
Right.
don't want to, like, it's irresponsible just to make. I mean, there's so many bad books out there where people just do make stuff up, but I'm not gonna. That's irresponsible just to make stuff up. And I want to show my work. That's the other thing that's really important to me is I want to show my work. I want to tell people exactly how I got to these conclusions, And so if you look at all of my books, I'm writing books for a popular audience, no question. I'm not an academic, but in all of my books, I have endnotes, and not these kinds of like flimsy endnotes where it says like page 14 and then there's one site. I will make a
Hmm.
claim and there will be a superscript number 13, and you can go into the endnotes and say, this is the study I'm citing to make that claim. And if you want, look it up and tell me that I'm wrong. And there have been a
Hmm.
couple instances where there was one instance in a book I wrote called Drive, where I don't know how it happened, but I made a pretty colossal mistake where I made a claim and I put a footnote there, and the footnote cited a study that had nothing to do with the claim that I was making.
Huh.
And I've subsequently fixed it. And so I want to be able to show my work. So for instance, this the World Regret Survey, this giant database, people can go on and you can, if you want to take the time, folks, you can go on there and you can read thousands of regrets yourself if you feel like it. All right.
Hmm. Hmm.
For the quantitative survey, there's a link in the book where you can go and you can see. I didn't put up the entire survey, but I could say here are the exact numbers that we came up with to derive the claims that we're making, and you can take a look at this 4-page PDF, like a polling firm would do. You can look at this 4-page or whatever it is, 4 or 5-page PDF, and you can see here are the exact numbers that we're talking about.
And it makes sense because, as you said, you're reaching a popular audience and you're doing the hard work in making sure that you don't cite a wrong study or that you don't have enough numbers to have a representative sample when you
Right,
build a
exactly.
conclusion in your books. So, and when, for example, you can maybe pick this book as an example, The Power of Regret, or I'm just curious, when do you have an idea that is worthy of a book versus just an article or a long essay?
Great question. You don't until you try stuff. So let me give you an example. So sometimes I'll have an idea and maybe I'll write an article about it. So I'll start with the article and I'll realize after writing the article, there's not a lot more to say. I don't have any more questions about this. And that's a sign that it's not a book. But I'm glad I started off writing an article rather than a book because I figured that out quickly. Now, there could be other times when I write an article, I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I barely scratched the surface. What about this? What about that? What about that? Or I write an article and I get feedback and people say, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? I don't believe this part of it. Why do you say, And so I think that's a way to test things out too. The other thing that I do for books is that, I have a list of ideas that sort of pretty long-running list of ideas and things, most of which, when I go back and look at them, are terrible, awful ideas. And then, but what I'll do when I have an idea for an idea that's stuck around for a while is I will write a book proposal, which for me is usually a 40-page document that says, here's what this book is. Here's what the general shape of it is. Here's some of the claims that I'm probably going to be making. Here's who the audience is. Here's why there's nothing else on the market like this. Here's why I'm the perfect person to write it. All right. And in doing that, there have been times where I started writing a book proposal, and there have been times where I completed a whole book proposal and I said, I don't want to write this book. I don't want to spend years working on it. I don't want to spend years working on this. Or there have been other times where I've gotten partway through a proposal and I said, oh my God, this is actually not a book. This idea is weaker than I originally thought. But it took the test of writing about it to expose that weakness. And again, that's a good thing. I would much rather know this is a crappy idea halfway through writing a proposal than 6 months after signing a contract to write a book about that.
And this begs the question of, do you have a writing routine that you follow?
When I write books, I do. When I write books, I do. I'm pretty rigid. What I do is I get to my office. I'm talking to you from my office here. I get to my office, and I usually come to my office, get into my office around 8:30 in the morning, sometimes 9. Somewhere. I'm not super early, not super late, just somewhere in the middle. I'm not one of these people. I begin working at 5 o'clock in the morning, or I don't roll into the office until noon. I'm just a normal person. 8:30. Okay. So, and what I'll do on writing days is I usually almost always will give myself a number of words that I have to write that day. So it could be sometimes just 500. Sometimes it can be a little bit longer, 700, but not a massive number. And I don't do anything else until I hit that number. I won't answer my email. I won't bring my phone in the office. I won't do anything except until I won't do anything. And once I hit that number, I can do whatever I want. But until I hit that number, I can't do anything else. And then I'll go through it then I'll do the same thing the next day. Right. And the next day. And the next day. And the next day. And the next day. And the next day.
What was the longest, do you remember sitting down at 8:30 and just writing until all the way in the night? Because maybe you didn't hit the
Not all the way into the night, but there have been times it's painful. It's a horrible day. Let me tell you, it's a horrible day when it's like literally like 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, and I still haven't hit that number. That's relatively rare. I can usually do it, and I can usually do it by lunchtime. But to be fair, there are days when, and those are not many, but they are miserable days. Miserable days.
Do you listen to any music when you write? Anything resembling music? No. Interesting.
No,
I was going to ask you.
I sometimes go the other direction. Well, I will wear earplugs and sometimes noise canceling headphones.
Oh, nice.
But never music ever.
That's good to know. I mean, I guess this is the kind of rigor I would have expected.
I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying I'm saying that's just, your mileage may vary. I can't stand listening to music when I write. It's too distracting.
I'll just end this interview with the last question of, what's been your proudest creation so far?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. I'm trying to, I think that at this point, I'm reasonably proud of, having done this for 2 decades now. I'm reasonably proud of just the entire body of work that there is. It's not a massive amount of stuff. It's not going to change the world, but there is stuff out there in the universe that I created and that will, be there for a long time, and that makes me feel pretty good. The idea that my grandchildren, or not even grandchildren, or my great-grandchildren or great-great-grandchildren could go to the Library of Congress, if that still exists, or the digital Congress in the metaverse, and can look up a book and say, wait a second, Pink, I think that dude was my great-great-grandfather, and that's what he did. Wow, that's cool.
No, but I feel like you've already changed the world. You're being too modest, but the fact that millions of people have read your book and really, reading a book is such a personal endeavor. They're spending hours
Yeah,
of their life with
I
you,
agree.
listening to
I
what you
agree.
said.
I
That's just
agree. That's why. That's
wonderful.
why. That's why. That's why I take the promise I make to readers very seriously. It's why I try to produce quality stuff. It's why I try. It's why I edit and edit and edit and edit and try not to go on and on and on and write too long. It's why I try to do exhaustive research. It's why I show my work. It's why I try to make myself available to readers. It's just like that's how I think that's how I roll. I think you have an incredible. People are giving you an incredible gift,
Gift.
and I think you
Yeah.
have to reciprocate by honoring what they're giving you and by delivering and over delivering on the promise that you're making to them.
With that, I'd love to just turn to a few questions from people that I see in the chat box here. Do you have a few more minutes and then we can
Sure.
wrap it up?
Yep.
Wonderful. I will pick a few questions that I'm seeing from here. There's one question from Anupama where she says, sometimes having a strong regret discourages us from pursuing something rather than encouraging us. For example, I should have read more books as a kid, but now I feel, does it even matter anymore? How do you overcome that?
Well, I mean, I think there are a couple ways there. So this is from who was the question from? Was from Anupama.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Anupama, call the Anupama of 10 years from now. Ask Anupama of 2032 what they think. Does if you want to if you spend the next 10 years not reading, what is the Anupama of 2032 going to think? I think that person's going to be pretty disappointed in you. And so I think so I think it does matter. But don't take my word for it. Talk to Anupama of 2032 and ask whether it matters. The second thing is that for a lot of these kind of foundation regrets, you can't go back in time and read the books that you didn't read, to age 8 and read more when you were a kid. You can't do that. But there is this old, somewhat threadbare proverb that people seem to like, and that actually has a lot of insight into it, which is that, what's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. What's the second best time to plant a tree? Today. And I think that gives us some guidance there.
This question is from Rajesh, who you know. So Rajesh says, from the research and analysis, did you see how one dealt with regret related to their concept of self-worth, self-esteem, and confidence? Sounds like a relevant question.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's a regret related to, I think that in some ways, a lot of regrets go directly to our self-worth, self-esteem, and confidence. That's one reason why we want to try to avoid them. I think that I think the key in reckoning with them is not to make, it's partly what the self-compassion research tells us, is not to make universal attributions based on single incident. So for instance, we have this tendency sometimes, if we let's say that let's go back to our bully example. Okay, that bully did a bad thing. But if that bully says, because I did that bad thing, I'm an inherently and irredeemably bad person, that's dangerous. That goes directly to your self-worth. And so what you need to do is to evaluate the act rather than the person. This is fundamental in a lot of therapeutic techniques. You evaluate the act rather than the person. And you don't make universal attributions about who the person is based on single moments. I don't think that any single thing we do in our lives represents us fully. But a lot of times we feel that way, especially when we do bad things.
And on that, I just wanted to mention that there is something called the Solomon's paradox. Maybe you've heard about it, but this talks about something that you referenced earlier, which is we tend to solve someone else's problems much better than our own problems, just because we have a detachment level or layer from their problem versus our own. So I call it curious detachment. So if we all can just have slightly more curious detachment to our own problems, that could help. But yeah, I myself am still learning to do that. That's I want to be respectful of your time. So thank you so much, Dan. I had
Sure thing.
such
Thanks for
a
having
time
me.
just preparing for this interview, because preparing meant, reading your body of research and work. And what a great experience it is to just read your work and get to ask you these questions. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who came from across the world to watch this interview.
Thank you for having me, and thanks to everyone who took an hour to hear our conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Bye, guys. Thank you so much. I'm going to end the live stream right